Thank you for being with us tonight in our Bible study. We're continuing our study of the book of Proverbs, and tonight we're going to be examining the topic of wisdom about money. As we've emphasized throughout the series on the book of Proverbs, that obviously the book of Proverbs is an inspired book. It comes from God, and yet it's a little different from some of the other books of the Bible. Some of the books or some of the Proverbs we look at are simply facts of life and just tell us about just the way life is and how people treat one another. But there are more deeper truths in this book, which tell us that basically the way of the wise is the one that follows after God, follows that path, and there's a reward for that. And yet the way of the wicked is the wrong path to follow, and obviously certain destruction comes about because of that. But we'll get into that more concerning money in just a few minutes. Again, we'd like to remind everybody of the various programs available that you can watch if you're unable to be with us physically, or even if you can be with us physically on Sunday in our worship service, so you could still watch some of these programs and these resources. The In Search of the Lord's Way program with Phil Sanders out of Edmond, Oklahoma is on DirecTV Sundays at 7:30 on Channel 47. It's on Dish TV Sundays at 7:30 on Channel 239. It's on Spectrum Cable at the same time on Channel 3. This is an excellent program. You're able to worship with those in Edmond, Oklahoma. Also, there are various congregations throughout the world that have been broadcasting their programs. They have been either, you can find them either on the church website, you can find them on a YouTube, or even on Facebook Live. And so there are resources there if you can't be with us physically that you can still worship on the first day of the week. Or even if you can be with us physically, there still are these programs available. The two resources we always mention, Gospel Broadcasting Network and the World Video Bible School, both of these resources have just tremendous amounts of Bible material. They have different doctrinal studies, they have commentaries, they have historical documents or studies of different things concerning the Bible and history, and various other topics. So if you want to get into a little deeper study of your Bible or just know more about different books of the Bible, these resources are excellent for that. It's extremely important to understand the Christian's relationship to money or wealth. And it's always troubling. I think every culture has struggled with this as far as how we deal with those who don't have and those who have too much. We are struggling presently in our country with this as, how much is too much money to have? And how little is too little money to have? And how do we figure out this problem? It's always been a difficult problem, even from the beginning of time. The reality is there's always going to be different classes of people, so to speak, as far as society goes. There are going to be some who have more than others and some who don't have as much. And this is just sort of a fact of life, but it doesn't remove us from our responsibility of helping those who are poor. But even in our culture, we're reminded of that probably almost everybody who's listening to this would be considered rich in New Testament terms. The average person who lived 2,000 years ago in Israel lived from day to day. Jesus said, "Give us this day our daily bread." So that person literally went out as a day worker to earn money for his family so they could eat that night. And so that was something prayed for very strongly. It was actually rare for these individuals to eat meat. Perhaps they'd eat it once or twice a year on the feast of the Passover or maybe some other occasion. And so that was the average life in the first century. And so the poor people were even poorer than that. And you look at our culture today, look at how much we have, and even the poorest in our society, even though they struggle in some ways, still have so many blessings compared to how people lived in the first century. But to those of us who have good jobs, to those of us who have a place to live, we even have heating, we have air conditioning, we have various means of entertainment that we can watch and anything we want, clothes more than we need, food more than we need. Obviously, we're wealthy according to New Testament teaching. So we need to look at these passages in regard to us as being those who are wealthy. Also, in both the Old and New Testaments, the principle of stewardship is taught. A steward was a person who many times was a slave in a household. Let's say perhaps a person was very wealthy. Maybe he had 30 slaves. And the steward would be the chief over the other slaves. So if the owner of the house had to travel and be away for a while, or even if he didn't, this man was sort of overseeing the other slaves. He had a lot of responsibility. He had the responsibility of those under his care, but he still in turn answered to a higher power, a higher authority. In a similar way, we find that God has given this world to us as human beings and as Christians. We're to be stewards of this world. God reminds us that the gold and silver is His, Haggai chapter 2 and in verse 8. And obviously, we know every good and perfect gift comes down from God, from the Father of lights, with whom there's no variation or shadow of turning. So everything good we have comes from God, but also God demands we be stewards of it, that we handle our blessings properly. Concerning money, we are reminded that first of all, this money is a gift from God, and also the principle that we should work and use that money properly. Work is ordained in the Garden of Eden. Adam and Eve were told to take care of the garden. Even in the New Testament, Paul writes in 1 Timothy 5 about a person who refuses to work to support his family. He says that person's worse than an infidel, an unbeliever. And the point Paul is making is this: especially as Christians, we should be good workers to support our families. Even a Gentile, even a non Christian will support his family. How does that make a Christian look who fails to work and support his family? Next, Proverbs describes both the benefits of having wealth and the dangers of having wealth. And this is sort of an awkward thing to deal with sometimes, an awkward thing to balance in our lives because the reality is we live in a materialistic world. We live in a world in which there are things, there are possessions. There are things we like to have, things maybe we think we need to have, maybe we don't. But this is a part of it. So we should work and we should use our money properly. But then how do we handle the wealth which we have? And we realize, as we'll see, first of all, some of the benefits of having wealth. And then we will look at some of the dangers of having wealth and how we need to handle our wealth properly. First of all, wealth offers some security. I think that just goes without saying. Even if the Bible didn't teach us this, we've known that probably in every culture, those who are the wealthiest in that society or that culture probably have the best health care, probably live the best lives as far as material goods are concerned. There's probably some security involved. The wealthier you are, the more you can protect yourself. Even Abraham, as was a very wealthy man in the Old Testament, the book of Genesis tells us that he had 318 people in his own household who he used as soldiers whenever Lot was taken captive. And so the wealth of Abraham, and obviously God blessed Abraham, he was able to use that wealth to procure those who could protect him, and also go and try to save Lot. But also we're reminded that even though those who are usually at the top of society have some security from wealth, that it doesn't always protect. The rich man's wealth is a strong city. The destruction of the poor is their poverty. And there's the contrast here. Yeah, we've known in so many cultures, even the warning in the Old Testament about not looking down on the poor, not oppressing the poor. Even though in the Old Testament, the so-called social gospel of Amos, or the social issues of what's going on here, the idea that everybody should be treated equally. In the book of Amos, the leaders, the prophets, the priests, the rulers were taking advantage of the poor, the widow. We find Isaiah and Micah reflecting the same type of teaching. And so God's people, and especially his leaders, were to protect the poor, not to abuse them. Ezekiel describes a situation where the shepherds of Israel, again, the leaders, were actually devouring the flocks they're supposed to watch. So we see that the rich man's wealth is a strong city, and sometimes the poor is destroyed simply because he is poor, but this should not be the case. But the reality is there's some security, obviously, in being wealthy. The rich man's wealth is a strong city, and like a high wall in his own esteem. Can maybe even this wealthy man thinks that he is beyond being touched by human problems, by sickness, diseases, and so forth. But that doesn't happen. Disease and death comes to the rich and the poor. And so even though there's some wealth, there's some benefits of him being wealth, it can't protect him from everything. Wealth offers so-called friends. Solomon has lot to say about friends that we maybe do want, friends that we shouldn't have, and friends we need to be wary of or be careful of. But it says the poor man is hated even by his own neighbor, but the rich has many friends. And this is true, and we know why the rich has many friends. We want to benefit from that wealthy person. If we become friends with somebody who has quite a bit, then maybe somehow we can get part of what they obtain or have. Or perhaps we just enjoy the pride of being friends with somebody who's maybe a wealthy or a powerful person. Proverbs 19:6 and 7, to me, is sort of a sad 2 verses. He says, many entreat the favor of the nobility, and every man's a friend to one who gives gifts. And that's true. In every culture, you want to go after those who are maybe wealthy, powerful. We want their favor. We want to be in their good graces. And you're going to be a friend, the one who gives gifts, he's going to have a whole lot of friends. But notice the contrast here. All the brothers of the poor hate him. How much more do his friends go far from him? He may pursue them with words, yet they abandon him. To me, that's really sad. You know, Solomon doesn't get into the situation here as to why the poverty occurred. Elsewhere in the book of Proverbs, we find that poverty sometimes can occur because of laziness. The sluggard is a character who is told to be a more active worker, to provide for his family, to go to the ant. The ant takes in food in the summer, so he has something to eat in the winter. The sluggard makes all kinds of excuses as to why he cannot work and cannot provide for his family. So maybe he's poor for that reason. Maybe he's poor for other reasons beyond his own control. Maybe he simply doesn't have maybe some of the blessings or abilities. Maybe he has some handicap. You know, in ancient cultures, those who had diseases or maybe were born with different kinds of deformities, those people were at the mercy of culture, at the mercy of society. And so when this beggar would come along to help, to asking for some food to eat or some money, obviously people would run from him. Think of the story of Lazarus and the rich man. Here's Lazarus who's starving. He's has a horrible disease. All he wants is he'd love to eat even the crumbs that fell from the rich man's table. And of course, we know those things are reversed in eternity. Lazarus ends up at Abraham's bosom, and the rich man in Hades are in torment. But the sad thing is here, people are running away from the poor. Again, maybe it's a legitimate person who has a need and you don't want to help, or maybe it's the person who doesn't. Maybe it's a person who's bad with money, who's continually begging or whatever and pleading. But either way, it's a sad situation. He says he may pursue them with words, yet they abandon him. So wealth does offer so-called friends. And also, wealth allows one to speak freely. There's obviously power that is found in wealth. The poor man uses entreaties, but the rich answers roughly. We think of the man who has no place in society, so to speak. He has very little power, very little people to speak on his behalf. But then if he's at the mercy of the rich man can say anything he wants to, but the poor man has to speak a certain way. And so these are things that come with wealth. But also, if you can see behind all these proverbs, pride many times can come with wealth too. The proud man who can look down and mistreat the poor person simply because he can do it. Or the proud man who fails to help the poor person just simply because he doesn't want to is a real possibility. With that in mind, let's look at some more principles about wealth. First of all, it has to be gained honestly, and this is just self-evident from the Bible. God has always demanded honesty out of his people. Whether we look at the Ten Commandments as far as not lying, being honest with the truth, or even that we should not steal, take from somebody that rightfully is theirs, we have no right to take from. In the New Testament, we find that the sort of the Christian view of work and stewardship in Ephesians, the 4th chapter, when Paul says, "Let him who stole steal no more, but let him work honestly with his hands so that he can give to him who is in need, in time of need." And that's the way it is. If you were a thief, don't steal anymore. If you are a thief, don't steal anymore. But work honestly, and then as a result of that money, use that money properly that God has blessed you with. Wealth gained by dishonesty will be diminished, but he who gathers by labor will increase. With many of these proverbs, as I've emphasized as we've gone throughout this study, Solomon doesn't always explain why this is true. But it says wealth gained by dishonesty will be diminished. Whether he's talking about the fact that maybe thieves who steal and just take and they don't respect what they have, or maybe they aren't good stewards of what they have, it's going to be diminished. We can look at different bank robbers and their luxurious lifestyles. You look at some of the Dillingers and these other characters who stole thousands and thousands of dollars that they could have lived comfortably the rest of their lives. And yet they spent this money very luxuriously and ended up having to continue to rob banks. Maybe that's what he's talking about. Maybe he's talking about in eternity, that if we've gained this wealth dishonestly, it's not going to help us in eternity. But he who gathers by labor will increase. I think among other things, this point tells us that when we work honestly and fairly, it's a benefit to ourselves. We should have good self-esteem. There's nothing wrong with knowing that you have worked hard that day and you've done a good job. As a result of that, you can, be a good steward of what you have. Maybe provide for your family, help others, and give back to God what He deserves. But first of all, wealth must be gained honestly. Second, it is best if it is accumulated gradually. This is a proverb I wasn't aware of until a few years ago. It's always sort of intrigued me. The idea that Proverbs says that people that come into money real quickly, it's not a good thing. And yet we know all these cautionary tales from our own society. How many times have we seen these high-profile, multi-million-dollar lottery winners who who win, 10, maybe hundreds of millions of dollars, and all of a sudden they're broke a few years later. And we think, how on earth can this happen? And we see it many times in other areas, whether maybe it's an athlete who goes from being relatively poor in their life to all of a sudden having millions and millions of dollars. And yet we've seen these same stories about these exact same people being broke and destitute and having nothing. Probably a couple of principles come into play here. First of all, Christ says if we're not faithful in a little, we won't be faithful in a lot. But if we're faithful in a little, we'll be faithful in a lot. The point he's making is if we don't know how to handle what we do have, let's say we come from a humble background and we're not good at handling our money in a humble background, then what that means is if we have a whole lot of money all of a sudden, we're probably not going to be good at handling our money that way. But regardless of background, that's the case. We can still be wealthy or make good money and still not handle money well, not have much to show for it. And then if we have a whole lot of money all of a sudden, we're going to make the same mistakes. Maybe another possibility, and we see this especially with some of these probably lottery winners and some of these high profile athletes, is all of a sudden they have some good people around them who want to show them how to invest that money, or people who just simply want to sponge off of what they have. And so they start throwing their money away around, and before you know it, they don't have any. But notice some of these proverbs. An inheritance gained hastily at the beginning will not be blessed at the end. Solomon, again, doesn't say exactly why, but maybe the idea is if we sometimes have a lot of money all of a sudden, it is wasteful and it's not really a blessing. A faithful man will abound with blessings, but he who hastens to be rich will not go unpunished. Notice the point, he who hastens to be rich. There's a difference between working in this life and maybe moving up the social ladder because of hard work and being blessed because of that. But that person isn't necessarily hastening to be rich. That person simply is working and God has blessed him and the riches have come along with it. And of course, with those riches do come responsibility, as we know, as Paul writes in 1 Timothy 6 about how the wealthy in the world are still to be concerned about the poor and not to trust in uncertain riches. Proverbs 28:22, a man with an evil eye hastens after riches, does not consider that poverty will come upon him. So the idea that somehow we're going to try to get money very quickly, we call them get rich quick schemes. Many times the lottery is this, and it's sad because the lottery many times affects those most vulnerable in society. If a person is struggling in life, maybe they've lost their job and they don't know where to turn, they look for this get rich quick scheme by spending money on a lottery. And yet the percentage of people who actually benefit from this is minuscule. But the people who suffer many times because of maybe the spending of the person who's the head of the house, that the children go without or the spouse goes without food or clothes or other things in life simply because of that. And so it's best not to try to get a whole lot of money all quickly. Maybe it's through robbing a bank or some other form of dishonesty. The best route, obviously, is to be honest and work hard at the job that you have. 2 points I want to make here as we come down toward the close of our lesson. Number one, riches easily disappear. You probably could have said, I knew that without reading the Bible. Money disappears quickly. He says, don't overwork to be rich because of your own understanding. Cease. We set your eyes on that which is not. For riches certainly make themselves wings. They fly away like an eagle toward heaven. Notice again, he says, don't overwork to be rich. Sometimes people work hard, they become wealthy, and that's not inherently sinful. But if your goal in life is just simply to see how much money I can get, and I kill myself working to do that, that's a mistake and it can be a sin. Many times we can go through life trying to work all the time, not because we have to support our family, but because we want many of these possessions in this world. Before we know it, our children have grown up. We haven't been a part of their lives, and all we have to show is maybe much money because of it. And so overworking to be rich is not a blessing, but rather it's a curse. He says, we set your eyes on that which is not. And also the other point he makes here is that, money, there's no certainty in money. Paul says, don't trust in uncertain riches. There's not a single individual alive who knows exactly what's going to happen to the stock market every day. Back in the 1920s, before the Black Friday, many people were doing very well, had no clue they were going to end up losing all their money. Quite a few people ended up actually taking their own lives after that Black Friday. And that's sad. That I'm sure it's not a pleasant thing to lose much of your money, if not all. But if your life is completely based in what your possessions, what you have, then that's a sad situation. I can remember my own life when Back in 1987, when the stock market fell on a Monday, they called it Black Monday, and it fell 22% in one day. And again, the difficulty, the depression that comes in because of that. But the point I'm making about that is this: as bad as that might be and catastrophic as that might be, there's something much more catastrophic than that. That is not preparing ourselves for heaven, realizing that even if those riches do disappear in this life, we can't take them with us anyway. So even if we die a pauper or die a billionaire, we can't take either our debt or our money with us into eternity. So realize that riches do easily disappear. And second, wealth will not deliver from death. Treasures of wickedness profit nothing, but righteousness delivers from death. I don't know if Solomon's talking here about the fact that those who achieve money, wickedly, either through robbing or deception or some type of, theft or whatever, that there's no profit for it as far as spiritually speaking, or maybe there's just no actual benefit in it as far as that person's life. I'm not sure exactly. But we do know this much: righteousness delivers from death. That when we live a righteous life, that we will, of course, receive the reward of being with God eternally in heaven. The one thing I do know, there have been some people who've been very wealthy down through the years who have tried to postpone their deaths, put it off, and get the best doctors available, the best medicines and so forth available, and yet they still die. And that's just the reality of it. So again, remember that phrase in 1 Timothy 6, don't trust in uncertain riches, because riches aren't certain. We have many times investors or people, money experts sometimes telling us they have a guarantee to make so much money and this and that, and maybe some of them are right, maybe some of them are closer to being right than others. But as Paul says, they're uncertain riches, and as Solomon says, they can flee from us. Let's be better stewards of what we have. Let's understand true wisdom concerning riches. Let's not work too hard to become wealthy. Let's realize also the limits of what wealth can do. But also, let's be concerned about the poor and those who don't have. As I've said earlier in the lesson, as Solomon mentioned, we know even the poor in our culture, there might be various reasons for that. But we're still reminded to do the best we can in dealing with those who do not have. We thank you for being with us in our Bible study tonight.